Recording has been started.
Good morning, our viewers. My name is Dr. Adityanjee, and we are having our fifth episode of Strategically Speaking with Dr. Adityanjee as a new feature of the Council of Strategic Affairs. We are going to carry a conversation today with a highly accomplished and distinguished academic who is truly a China expert in the academic sense. We are having Professor Srikanth Kondapalli, who is Dean of the School of International Studies at the famous Jawaharlal Nehru University. He has been affiliated with Jawaharlal Nehru University for a number of years, having done his MPhil as well as PhD from the same school. He has also worked at Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. He has written a number of books. He has been widely interviewed, and like a true China expert, he speaks, reads, and speaks Mandarin. So, welcome to Professor Kondapalli to our episode of Conversation with uh, Professor Kondapalli, and we'll be talking about SCO, which stands for Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, and China's Toolkits. So, welcome, sir. We are very glad that you have joined this conversation. Uh, Welcome to the platform.
Thank you very much.
So, we'll start our conversation with the recent meeting of SCO, the head of state meeting on July 4th, 2023. As you know, this meeting was held virtually. And usually the virtual meetings in international arena do not have the same impact and cloud as live meetings have. So one is wondering, what was the reason for India to go for a virtual meeting of SCO instead of a live meeting? Was it fear of chaos created by Pakistan? Or was it a subtle hint from Vladimir Putin that he may not be able to come? Or it was some roadblocks, anticipated from China in China's India containment strategy in international arena. What is your viewpoint on that?
Well, I think the 23rd meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization was held virtually. Till the last moment, we were expecting that this will be a physical meeting in Delhi. And there were a lot of major preparations were made. 140 meetings were organized across the country, and nearly 50 major items have been discussed in the process. And there is a huge revamp of the SEO posturing since the New Delhi meeting. For example, the SEO has been mainly focusing on energy security, multipolarity. It was also focusing on anti-US posture. And of course, there is also the counter-terrorism and economic and technological trade-related matters. What New Delhi Summit brought in is to look at the startups, to look at innovation, to look at Buddhism, to look at soft power. So SEO has many authoritarian regimes. What India tried to do was to bring in a soft touch to the whole process. So in the run-up to the SEO, there was the speculation about the attitude of the other member states, specifically Russia and China. It is important to note that Russia spends about 24% of the budget of the SEO, while 24% more is paid by the Chinese. So roughly half of the budget of the SCO is maintained by the Russians and the Chinese. The rest of the members, roughly about 10% or even below. So that makes up also the decision making process within the SCO, with Russia and China calling the shots. And so with that, there is some pressure mounting from Russia and China. And India had no other go but to organize this in a virtual format because of the kind of pressure exerted by China and Russia. Number one. Number two reason is possibly uh, a few weeks before the final SCO summit meeting, there was the visit of Bilawal Bhutto and Qin Kang, the foreign minister of China, who was now jettisoned from his post due to some scandals in his personal life. As a result of this, the comments made by Mr. Bhutto and the comments made by also Qin Kang and the visit by General Li Shangfu, the defense minister of China, to attend the SCO defense ministerial meeting. The comments made by them on the border situation was not really conducive. For example, they stated that everything is hunky-dory on the border, despite the 19 discussions that were conducted between the two commanders at the corps commander level. However, India has been suggesting that CBM's confidence building measures should be implemented, and then the Chinese troops should vacate following the disengagement and de escalation process. So the Chinese have been saying that everything is normal in the border, and India should consider this as the new normal of the maintenance of Chinese troops on the border. It is estimated that China has about 60 to 70,000 troops in Ladakh, Aksai Chin area alone. In addition, of course, there is the whole of line of actual control, which is possibly more number of troops are positioned on the other side. So, in the background of this, and SCO began as Shanghai 5 in 1990s, 96. And one of the crucial things was the CBMs in the military field. That was what the SCO stood for. However, we saw in Galwan and post Galwan, China had removed the CBMs and took unilateral actions on the border with India and occupied some disputed areas. So this was not in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization spirit. So India was concerned about the progress on the de-escalation and disengagement process. So this is one where we saw cold responses from China regarding the border situation. So I think that was what was the one of the main concerns for India to go for a virtual meeting. Mr. Bhutto's comments on Gujarat did not also go well, and there was no guarantee that they would raise some of the bilateral issues which a multilateral organization like SCO or any other organization should not be, taking it up. So I think, yeah.
Taking up from foreign ministers' meetings in Goa and the Bilawal Bhutto fiasco, it's understandable that virtual meeting was the platform not to give, megaphone to either Pakistan or China and downgrade the summit. But Prime Minister Modi openly criticized nations propagating terrorism in the SCO head of state meeting. Did it get traction in the final communique? of the SCO meeting, head of state meeting? The critique of
Yes, indeed.
terrorism.
The terrorism is one of the main planks of the SCO, counterterrorism, and there is an organization called RATS, Regional Anti-Terrorist Structure, and there is also the peace mission exercises conducted by Russia, Central Asia, and other countries in which China keeps sending thousands of troops in the counterterrorism campaign. So SEO actually stood for counterterrorism, although unlike the post 9/11 consensus and the post 9/11 kind of effective counterterrorism strategy is not reflected in the SEO format. Nevertheless, the SEO countries were relatively successful in countering terrorism in Central Asian region, even though we have the IMU, we have other terrorist organizations in Chechnya or other areas. So, so it is the counterterrorism mission of SEO is a complex and a mixed one. Um, However, the final outcome is, of course, as you know, that India has configured counterterrorism as the number one security challenge, number one security objective of India, and hence it had raised this issue in terms of counterterrorism. So that was one major, I think, plank on which there has been a lot of, discussion. Um,
So
but I would, yeah.
while we are talking about the RATS mechanism as part of SCO process, China's rhetoric has not matched its behavior. China has consistently blocked anti-terrorist measures, whether it is in FATF or in United Nations Security Council. Uh, you know, any membership state that brings certain counter-terrorism proposals, China has tried to shield its all-weather ally in these international fora. Did any member state in SCO call out China for its inconsistencies as far as anti-terrorism measures are concerned?
Except for India, no other country had raised this issue. And this is partly because many SEO countries are aligned to China and Russia. And so there is the reluctance to call out China on the double standards that it follows on counterterrorism. In the 1267 Committee of the United Nations Security Council dealing with the Al Qaeda Committee, the Chinese have periodically and for over a long period of time, they refuse to condemn the Pakistan based terrorist individuals or organizations. Zakirul Rahman, the other terrorists based in Pakistan. So while India had submitted the reports and evidence in this regard, the Chinese categorized these as inadequate, and so they have bailed out Pakistan in terms of the 1267 committee proceedings. It is only when the Trump administration threatened to introduce a new counterterrorism law and get it passed through the Security Council, it is only then that the Chinese have relented in the final analysis. But even then, they only agreed to um, introduce diluted provisions on counterterrorism in relation to Pakistan. The FATF has been mentioned. This is one of the most diluted as far as the Pakistani, counterterrorism aspects are concerned. Um, Also, the Chinese have participated in these peace mission exercises They provided limited information regarding the post 9/11 consensus. And thirdly, they also have good relations with the Taliban. The Taliban leaders' visit to Tianjin and meeting Foreign Minister Wang Yi at that time indicated to the age-old ties between China and the Taliban. Um, there are some 6 groups within the Taliban, and 2 groups are closer to the Chinese. And it appears that the Chinese also had factored in the Afghan issue as part of the counterterrorism. And today they have been in close ties with the Taliban. Um, the Interior Minister, Mr. Hekmatyar, is said to be close to the Chinese. And in the previous ISAF presence, the Chinese intelligence units in Kabul were routed, um, while during the Hekmatyar's time, we see that the Chinese embassy is in close contacts with the Interior Ministry in Afghanistan. So these 3 factors, I think, SCO, Pakistan, Afghanistan, are related when we discuss about terrorism. There is a special group within the SEO on Afghanistan. I think there is also some coordination in this regard. But China's effort here is to isolate India. China's efforts here is to put up a quadrilateral called the China, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Tajikistan quadrilateral. This is to counter India to an extent. And so there is a dilution in the counterterrorism efforts.
So all of us feel that both SCO and BRICS were mechanisms advanced by China to fulfill its foreign policy objectives and regional hegemony. SCO, as you know, is headquartered in Beijing. Although the idea of the NDB or the BRICS banks was advanced by India, finally China forced it to be headquartered in Shanghai. Now, BRICS becoming BRICS Plus and being open to more memberships in future, from G11 to maybe GN or whatever, will China force the BRICS Plus organization to be headquartered in some Chinese city? What are your views on that?
Well, it is too early to say about the plan to have an headquarters of the BRICS. It remained headquarters-less so far in the last 15 meetings. And in Johannesburg, when the grouping was expanded to 6 more members, there is a lot of speculation on the agenda change within the BRICS. Just to give a background, it was Russian former Prime Minister Primakov who raised the issue of multipolarity in the mid-90s. And at that time, China had close relations with the United States. Chiang Zemin visited Bill Clinton, and the Clinton administration proposed the most favored nation treatment to China, as well as the WTO entry in 2001. So at that time, China was lukewarm to the multipolarity debate. However, as the decoupling process, de-risking process began since late Trump administration, we have seen the Chinese interest in multipolarity increasing. Despite the recent visits by Blinken, um, Yellen, as well as Kissinger and Raimondo, we have seen that there is a lot of reluctance on the part of the Chinese to cobble up on the United States. Um, and as a part of this, the anti-US rhetoric has increased. But we also need to see the responses of other countries. For example, India and Brazil are reluctant to make the BRICS formation an anti-US formation. So, so we also have to see the intra-BRICS political discussions, because the IPSA countries are democratic, while other countries have an authoritarian streak. And so this is a new kind of equation that needs to be considered, number one. Number two, there is also the joining of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and to an extent Ethiopia, and possibly Argentina, who may like to see the anti-US rhetoric of Iran be reduced in the formation. Today, Russia, China, Iran have a huge anti-US position within the BRICS. So if the other members do not oppose this kind of a streak, it is quite possible that the grouping can turn to an anti-US position. Having said that, in 2014 Fortaleza meeting in Brazil, the BRICS countries took a decision that it would be one country, one vote. So it is quite possible that consensus may not come about easily in terms of the joint declarations in the near future. We should remember that also Saudi Arabia is a military ally of the United States, although it has reduced in influence. When we look at the oil factor, when President Biden asked Saudi Arabia to reduce the oil production, Saudi Arabia actually has increased oil production to nearly 13 million barrels a day now, out of a total global output of nearly 130 million barrels a day. So we also need to see the frictions between United States and Saudi Arabia in relation to what does that mean for the BRICS consensus. On the one hand, and on the other, Russia, China, Iran. You also have India and Brazil, which are reluctant to take an anti-US position.
So this brings me to the next question. 2023 saw expansion of both SCO as well as BRICS to include Iran in both the groupings. Now, India has had civilizational relationship with Iran, but Iran has not been very consistent in support of Indian positions on a number of issues. So when push comes to shove, will Iran take a pro-China policy in these two organizations, or will be in support of Indian positions, possibly in near future, if there are contentious issues brought to either SCO or BRICS Plus?
Well, it is quite complex, but I think Iran will take a position which is in their national interests, both in SEO as well as the BRICS. The Chinese promised $340 billion investment in Iran. However, we have not seen much flowing into Iran so far. The Chinese have also announced $100 billion investment in the South Pars oil wells, but that has not really come about so far. On the other hand, Chabahar is up and running right now, and it is also part of the transport corridors that India is trying to enter into as a counter to the Belt and Road Initiative projects. So Iran has been, supportive of the Chabahar port and the subsequent events. Whether the Chinese position will prevail or the Indian position, it is difficult at this moment to look at this. However, there is also the other countries' role especially Brazil. Brazil has offered to look at uh, the Ukrainian conflict and some kind of mediation. That has not yet happened so far. But President Lula made some statements which indicated to a moderate position. So I think Brazil, Argentina, and Egypt and Ethiopia, their positions are also would be tested when we look at the Iranian posture vis-a-vis the Chinese and Indian side. So my hunch is that Iran would play up these countries one and against the other, and their main concern, of course, is on the nuclear factor. They would like to buy time. We did see Russian and Chinese cooperation in the Iranian nuclear program, um, but due to the arrangements between US and China, there is the reluctance to actively participate in the nuclear program of Iran. So all these factors will play a big role when it comes to Iran's position vis-a-vis China and India.
So you did mention about IPSA having a moderating role in BRICS Plus. My own understanding is that China de facto killed IPSA in 2011, when China, without any pre-consultations, enhanced or enlarged BRIC as originally conceptualized as a big and emerging economies to include South Africa, which did not have any, on any yardsticks, membership of BRIC to become BRICS. No substantial meeting of IPSA as standalone meetings have been held since 2011. Is it time to resurrect IPSA as a counterweight to BRICS Plus or Chinese hegemony in these organizations? Because the way IPSA was conceptualized, 3 continents, 3 democracies from the South, having some unanimity in global South. What are your views on that?
It is indeed true that the IPSA has become a non-functional organization so far, despite the few meetings that were conducted before 2011. And this still holds a lot of relevance today because of the positions that Brazil, India, South Africa have in terms of their aspirations in among the global South. For example, Dr. Adityanjee, you mentioned about democracy. This is pretty dear to these 3 countries. These are practicing democracies, competitive elections, consecutive, mandate is secured from the public, and hence they are, highly influenced by the democratic, traditions. It is true that South Africa had a certain anti-US streak, as is reflected during the Ukrainian conflict or during the COVID-19, when South Africa defended China and Russia in the General Assembly and other areas. Uh, Bolsonaro's Brazil was much more explicit during that time, and India also took several measures during the COVID-19, which were, reflective of the democratic. For example, the vaccine Maitri and the mobilization of the global South countries. So this friction point, I think, still prevails within the BRICS, the democratic grouping and the authoritarian. So we need to see how this is carried forward in the future. But I agree that the IPSA needs to be resurrected for the global South, policies in the future. BRICS, of course, had taken a certain global South position on climate change issues, on WTO dispute resolution mechanism, on the technology transfer and IMF voting rights and others. Um, that kind of work is still pending. We would expect these three countries pitching more on these, especially climate change and WTO dispute resolution mechanism. And it is here that these countries also will be, having a negative experience with China more specifically, because if you look at the intra-BRICS trade, China dominates, but China does not allow these countries' products to be sold in China. For example, Brazilians found soybean exports to China have been restricted, as with iron ore, as with other products. So sooner than later, Brazil, India, South Africa are likely to raise these issues of market access in China, as is promised under the WTO regime. Likewise, on tweaking the equal but differentiated responsibilities on climate change issues. China has been piggybacking on these two, on WTO and climate change, with the basic countries, Brazil, South Africa, India, and China, and utilizing the collective force of these countries to push its own agenda, um, and increasing the anti-US rhetoric. So it is quite likely that these IPSA countries would sooner than later push across the WTO related and climate change related. Specifically, South Africa and Brazil uh, are likely to take this in more intensive fashion.
Incidentally, about resurrecting IPSA mechanism, I had in series of articles initially talked about China's Machiavellian tendency and killing of IPSA. And then I followed up in 2014 with an article, and I will tell you the title, Invigorating IPSA, Inventing IPSA. So I had
Mm.
suggested that the IPSA from a trilateral mechanism be made pentalateral, and the inventing new IPSA would be India, Indonesia, Brazil, South Africa, and Argentina. This was in 2014. I had written this article and submitted to IDSA. They
Mhm.
deliberated on it for 3 months and then finally said it doesn't make sense. So I published it elsewhere. It is still on the internet. You can just Google it and find invigorating IPSA, inventing IPSA. So, you know, one had anticipated what China was up to, and using the principle of democratic global South, India could have had larger clout if the foreign policy establishment had picked up the idea,
Mm.
but didn't. Any comments?
I think one of the approaches here is Mumbai consensus, rather than Washington consensus or Beijing consensus. Mumbai consensus is said to be a middle path approach, in a typical Buddhist fashion, a middle path approach where there is no insistence on countries to follow democracy, but yet at the same time, India promoting the civil society, India promoting the private sector in these countries with which India is doing business in Africa, South America, or in Asia. So, a middle path approach is what the Indian establishment is looking at, rather than positing between Washington consensus and Beijing consensus. So the current thinking is that how do we, without ruffling feathers, how do we pursue democracy in the global South without imposition from the top, as the Washington consensus would argue, or um, not allowing any democratic experiment, as the Beijing consensus insists on, how does India um, uh, clear through this um, uh, and promote democracy in these global south countries. So without imposition, not a top to bottom approach, but providing assistance, guidance, uh, and training for the civil society in these countries. So when you look at the India Africa summit meetings, when you look at the various other meetings that India has had so far with the global south, that is the position that India had taken without ruffling feathers. That is imposing democracy. How does India promote democracy? So that is the key debate that is happening. And Mumbai consensus seems to be the option that India has at the moment.
So both Russia and China had an unstated agenda for establishing a BRICS currency, but in the last meeting in Johannesburg, that idea did not take a concrete shape. Would it be in India's interest to support the process of establishment of a BRICS currency or kill the idea in the bud?
Well, two, three factors here. Number one is in terms of global transactions, the US dollar has about 88% of global transactions today. And it wouldn't be a realistic idea that there is a BRICS currency in the near future. So that is number one. Uh, we of course also have the euro, British pound, Japanese yen, all these again other currencies which are quite dominant in the global arena. The Russian and Chinese recent urge to replace the dollar in the light of the Ukrainian conflict and the de-dollarization debate, I think it is just a pipe dream right now because of the overwhelming US dollar as the global currency. Um, that's number one. Number two, the if you look at the Indian aspirations in this regard, India has done some local currencies transactions. When you look at the Russian oil being imported, or with the um, Iranians when we were buying oil, or with other Middle Eastern countries, there was the regional currencies exchange. Given the US dollar, dominance and the problems that the Indian side faced in this regard. Having said that, the Indian preference is only limited local currencies, national currencies exchange, and it had not spoken about the de-dollarization. So we may possibly see central banks of the BRICS getting together, promoting the local currencies concept, if not the de-dollarization debate as such. The reason being that intra-BRICS trade is very minimal. If you look at the US-China trade, that is about $580 billion. China-ASEAN trade, which is about $1 trillion. China-European Union trade, which is about $560 billion. This is quite substantial when we compare with the Brazil-China trade, India-China trade, Russia-China trade, or China-South Africa trade. The intra-BRICS trade is no more than $500 billion, while China's trade with other major partners like US, EU, ASEAN, Japan, South Korea is more than $3 trillion. So intra-BRICS trade being very minimal, uh, the de-dollarization debate will not go too farther in this. Quite possibly they will deal with the local currencies. in regional trade mechanisms rather than pushing for a de-dollarization debate?
It is in India's interest to use local currencies, and BRICS meeting in Johannesburg actually endorsed the idea of, intra-BRICS trade in local currency, which is fine. At this point in time, Russia's agenda for de-dollarization is different from China's agenda for de-dollarization. Russia wants to preserve its national economic sovereignty and continue to do trades, whereas China's stated idea or putative motive behind de-dollarization is actually yuanization or establishment of yuan as a reserve currency. So India should not be actually falling into this trap of de-dollarization and actually talk basically dollar minimization.
Indeed, I think that is the discussion in Delhi about the local, exchanges, trade exchanges being conducted in regional currencies. When you look at the 2010 IMF reorganization, the renminbi has become the strategic reserve. And so China's ambitions have increased in terms of the renminbi internationalization. Since 2013 Belt and Road Initiative, one among the 5 connectivities is renminbi internationalization in the BRI. But even today, renminbi exchange is no more than 3% of the global exchanges. So that indicates to the limitations in Chinese ambition to replace the US dollar.
While advancement of multipolarity is China's stated object, both SCO and BRICS are part of China's foreign policy tool for advancing its own hegemony. How far China has been successful in institutionalizing both these SCO and BRICS into its BRI's flagship project?
I think there is a reassessment in China regarding the SEO, BRICS, and other multipolarity projects. The 19th Communist Party Congress and the 20th Communist Party Congress in China referred to multipolarization as an increasing trend. In other words, that China should further the intensification process. They see some benefits out of increasing multipolarity because that would have pitched the Russians against the Americans, the South Africans against the Americans, Indians, Brazilians, and other SEO states against the United States, while China would preserve its strength and bide for its time in the near future. So that was the calculation that China has had in terms of this multipolarity and others. So they wanted some time before they can regroup, they can counter the United States, and first resolve what they mentioned about Taiwan, South China Sea, Senkaku Islands, and other disputes in what they mention as China's rejuvenation. In other words, the multipolarity is a kind of united front tactics in the Communist Party's foreign policy posture in China. And they were basically buying time by pushing ahead the SEO and the BRICS. It also provides a certain kind of cushion for China to not to become a target of the United States. I think this policy has been quite successful before. For example, while President Bush mentioned about China as a strategic competitor, but soon 9/11 happened and United States was seeking assistance from the Chinese on counterterrorism or the consensus that they have reached on Afghanistan or on other global matters like North Korea, Iran, and so on. So the American ire was focused on Osama bin Laden. The American ire was focused on Russia in the Ukrainian conflict, and of course before. So China escaped the wrath of the American pressure. Even though United States treats China as a strategic competitor, the White House documents in this regard are an evidence in terms of its posture, American posture. Now, increasingly, it appears that since the US had taken Russia and China as competitors, and how to outcompete China is the main slogan in the American discussions. It is now confined to outcompeting rather than treating China as a strategic competitor. So this provides a window of opportunity for China again. And SCO BRICS are useful tools in China's foreign policy to provide a cushion to escape the wrath of the United States.
So China uses the rhetoric of multipolarity while advancing these alternative institutions. But China's intentions were very clear in 2014 when one of the Chinese defense officials during Obama presidency talked about a G2 condominium. So the support for multipolarity is a facade. What China wants is a bipolar world in which China is acknowledged as the other hyperpower along with United States. They understand they cannot challenge, at least in near future, United States as the reigning hegemon, but they want a bipolar world and use the rhetoric of multipolarity to hide their unstated objects. Any comments on that?
Increasingly, Chinese scholars like Yan Xuetung from Tsinghua University, by the way, he advises the Politburo of the Communist Party, and other scholars, they keep increasingly mentioning about the emerging Cold War. And Goh Chok Thung, the Singaporean senior minister, he had mentioned recently that a time has now come to choose between China or the United States. This is the conducive environment for China. If they force other countries to choose between United States or China, that is where I think the Chinese foreign policy success is. So increasingly, China is the one which is pushing the new Cold War 2.0, as the explanation for the global dynamics. However, Ukraine had interrupted the Chinese ambition of becoming the poster boy of the new emerging Cold War.
So with SCO meeting and BRICS meeting are over, India is preparing for the G20 summit on September 9th and 10th. With Xi Jinping's decision not to attend G20 meeting in person and sending the Prime Minister, does it reflect China's anti-India intentions? Are they trying to contain India into the global arena by downgrading their participation? Or the decision is entirely because of domestic instability, economic and otherwise, that is keeping Xi Jinping at home?
While it is true that the domestic situation is getting very difficult for the Chinese leadership to tackle, because an official unemployment rate of 21%, while some Chinese economists mention 46% unemployment rate. The real estate crisis, the protests that we saw on the lockdowns last December, in 18 cities across China, and decline in economic growth rates from 3.3% last year to the so far in the first half, we have seen the PMI, the manufacturing index, not reaching very high. This suggests that China's economic problems are mounting. Having said that, Xi Jinping visited Moscow this March, and he had just gone to Johannesburg, and so there are limited number of visits abroad by President Xi Jinping. While China promised that it will do everything to successfully organize the G20 in New Delhi, the sudden decision, probably to skip the New Delhi meeting, I think there are three factors which we need to consider. Number one, um, Prime Minister Modi mobilized the entire global south, and in the G20 meeting, it is likely that African Union could become the member of the G20. 55 country multilateral organization, African Union becoming a member of the G20 would be a huge success for India. And the Chinese are suspicious that India is taking the mantle of the global south, while the Chinese have previously sported that they are the leaders of the global south, although they never became member of the G77 countries or their agenda. Yet Chinese foreign policy keeps trumpeting that they are the leaders of the global south. So if African Union becomes the member, this would be a huge setback to the Chinese ambitions to become the leader of the global south. Number one. Number two, the Russian president is possibly not attending the G20 meeting. Like he did not visit South Africa for the 15th BRICS meeting. If President Putin is not attending the G20, then it is likely that China will become the target, as since Bali summit meeting, it has become 2:18, Russia, China versus the rest of 18 countries in the G20 format. So this is a worst case scenario for Chinese foreign policy in terms of getting targeted by the international community, specifically the rest of the other 18 members of the G20. So as a face-saving formula, possibly President Xi does not want to attend the New Delhi meeting. The third reason is we have seen a lot of anti-China feeling in India. The public opinion polls have provided a negative image of China, and this has aggravated after the Galwan incidents, where 20 Indian soldiers were killed. Also, the change in place names by China in Arunachal Pradesh, these have created a lot of negative feelings in India. So a visit by Chinese leader in this context would have been counterproductive for China. So possibly those are the three reasons why Xi Jinping is not making it up to the G20 meeting.
It has been a pleasure talking to you, Professor Kondapalli. Your views are very, very clear, lucid, and give a reflection of what is going on between China and India and China and rest of the world. So we are very pleased indeed to have you come for this conversation. And it's my hope that you will continue to grace your presence on this platform in future. I am thankful to you. Namaste and thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay. We are going to end the meeting.